Hey everybody, this is Pete A. Turner, Mark Patterson's friend, and I'm doing the intro again this week for him as he is over at Super Bowl Media Row doing what he does best, talk to people and get people motivated. So he just recently summited Vinson Massive, which is the tallest mountain on Antarctica, and basically dropped his bags at his world headquarters in Idaho and headed straight to Atlanta. So you guys have got me again, and I'm about to give you an introduction for a fantastic interview with Bernie Swain. But first, let's cover a couple of bases. One, make sure you go over to Mark's website, markpattersonnfl.com, or findingyoursummit.com. Either place you can get the e-learning course that Mark has just released. Now look, if you're not sure what you want to do with it, there's a free PDF you can download, read, and get started. And there's also a free assessment tool that'll let you kind of unlock your goals, relationships, job thing, whatever your summits are in front of you for 2019. He's got tools to get you started, and then you can work your way into the e-learning course. That's the first thing. The second thing is all of these shows are brought to you by Cynthia Besteman's Violets Are Blue product. They are fantastic. It's really something you should check out. Also, check out Cynthia's episode of the podcast. Now, let's talk a little bit about today's guest, Bernie Swain. He co-founded, along with his wife and another person, a thing called the Washington Speakers Bureau, and it's one of the most renowned speakers bureaus in the world. Now, how did they get there? Well, at first, they were barely alive. They were barely making it. After a year, they really didn't have much traction, any clients to speak of. And they had a chance because Bernie had a relationship with Steve Bell through a secondary thing. Steve, who was actually just this past week, we lost him. He's no longer with us, but he was a correspondent and reporter for ABC. He covered Vietnam, all kinds of things, and he was an established speaker. Wasn't happy with the bureau he was with, and so he said, hey, what do you guys have going on, Bernie? And so he and Bernie inked the deal, but they didn't ink it. What they did was they shook hands because Bernie realized if you're not happy with the bureau you're with and they're not delivering for you, why would you want to lock that person in? That freedom defined what the Washington Speakers Bureau was going to become. They were about the speaker. If we're not performing, please, by all means, go somewhere else where you're going to get what you want. That was the first big break. That let Steve go out and say to his peers, hey, this is different. You guys should come check this out. And they started signing people. The next big thing was they had a shot when President Reagan was post-presidency and wanted to sign with a bureau. All the big players in D.C. were in on the competition to get President Reagan. But it was something with what Bernie did, and he likens it to some of the things he's extracted from Lou Holtz, another client. And basically, it's about trust, and it's about caring for your client. That made a difference. So President Reagan and Nancy Reagan signed with him, and that put them into a different level where the very top speakers in the world knew the name Washington Speakers Bureau. It's an incredible story, hearing Bernie and Mark talk about it. I know you're going to enjoy this show. Thank you so much. Let's do it.
Hey everybody, it's Mark Patterson. I am back again for another phenomenal episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week I'm so excited because we have a guy on the pod that has got so much experience in his life. That doesn't mean he's necessarily old, but it means that he has been able to interact and deal with so many just fascinating people throughout this world. His name is Bernie Swain. Bernie, how you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me.
Oh my gosh! I'm going to kind of give away where we're going to go with this podcast, and then I want to dig back kind of into your roots, where you started, because to me it's really fascinating. It really ties into the story of Finding Your Summit, all about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And I think you certainly fall into that category. And adversity is defined in many different ways, as you know. But kind of the end punchline here is that you are the founder, the CEO, and I know you've got some partners of the Washington Speakers Bureau, and it has basically become one of the top leading speaking bureaus throughout the world. And the thing that really makes it fascinating, of course, is that you've been able to interact and have under your umbrella some of the most fascinating people of our time. I think we've got 2 or 3 presidents, 5 prime ministers. I mean, it's just incredible at your network, and for you to actually be able to be in the White House and be these other places, connecting with them and really engaging is so fascinating.
It is, and the great thing about our story is that we started with no experience whatsoever. So we built a company that became the largest in the world in its industry, and we started with no internet and no experience. So I think it's a great lesson for people starting out today, young entrepreneurs, millennials who are starting out and trying to find their way, and discouraged in some ways by the time it takes to succeed, and the competition today to find a new opportunity, a new path in life.
Well, boy, that's got a lot of pieces and parts in there, and I want to break that down here in a second. One of the things, again, getting back to some of the people, Ronald Reagan, other people that you've been able to interview or have, certainly you engaged with both he and Nancy, but then like others, they would fall under your umbrella, and then your service is essentially going out and finding these different speaking opportunities throughout the world where people want to come together and hear their message of inspiration or whatever their particular topic is. You said something that was very interesting that I read about the author, Alex Haley, who I think was the author of Roots. And he said where one person dies, a library burns down. But, certainly in the case, the library does burn down. But at the same time, when you're able to engage and talk to those different people, the world of information now that sits in your brain and that you can pass on to other people.
Yeah, so the interesting thing was I had never met Alex Haley before, and I got a call one day from him, and he said, "Can I come and visit you?" And I said, "Yeah, when would you like to set up the meeting?" And he said, "We'll look out the window." And I looked down, and there he is waving to me from a telephone booth. And he came up, and he would often come up unannounced. And for a person who was as well known and as busy as he would spend hours with us. And he used to say a phrase, when an old person dies, it's like a library burning. And that pithy phrase stuck with me as time went by, because what he was trying to say is our lives, each of our lives, are full of experiences. And each of those experiences is like a book, is like a volume of books that we can use to teach other people with and to learn from.
Well, let's go back to chapter 1 of your life, all right, of that book. And, essentially, it's pretty fascinating because you're a guy who did not grow up with, a tremendous amount of means and opportunities, and you really had to pave your own way. You were not given anything.
Right. My mother's side of the family were farmers in Virginia, and basically lived off the land. My father grew up in the poorest of mining towns in West Virginia, and lived in a 2-room house with 5 sisters and 2 brothers and assorted relatives. And when my grandmother couldn't take care of him, spent part of his childhood in an orphanage. So obviously no one in my family ever attended college before. I had a teacher in high school who was the football coach and the athletic director, and he encouraged me to go to college. Otherwise, I would have never gone. I wanted to be very much like him. So I set out on a path to become an athletic director or a football coach. And I graduated from college, went back to the junior high school I attended, became the football coach at the junior high school. A year later, I went back to college, to get a master's degree. I became the intramural director and then the assistant athletic director. And when the old-time athletic director at the university announced his retirement, I was promised his job. At the same time, I was marketing our basketball program, and a friend of mine who had been part of a marketing agency sent me an article about the largest lecture agency in the world. And in the article, it talks about how this big agent went into the Gerald Ford White House, and he signed Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig and Gerald Ford as clients. And near the end of the article, Henry Kissinger is complaining about the high commission rate that he wants to charge, and says to the head of that agency, "Why don't I simply sign with one of your competitors?" The head of the agency said, "I have no competitors." So I took the article home in Fortune magazine, and I left it on the coffee table. My wife picked it up a few days later, and she says, "I read this article. He has no competitors." And I think you're going to be discouraged by the bureaucracy of university life because you have so many ideas, and why don't we just start a lecture agency on our own? Well, I thought it was kind of a rather silly idea, but she prodded and probed prodded me over a period of weeks and convinced me to quit my job, give up the athletic director at university, and become and start our agency.
Okay, so wait a minute. Okay, so let's break that down. I want to go back. All right, so are you somebody in when you're in growing up in high school where you must have played football, right? That's number one.
I did. Yes.
Okay, and so did you go on to George Washington University and play football?
No, because they got rid of the football team just as I was getting there. So I played baseball at the university, but
Okay.
I was a physical education major.
Okay, so you're a student athlete and you're going there. So that was obviously you were kind of on that path. Now, when you got into the administration part, you were starting to coach, you're starting at the university. Did you find the frustration because your wife later came back to you and said, "Listen, there's a lot of bureaucracy that goes on at the college level. Of course, there's all these different layers, and you just can't snap your fingers and something happens. It's a budget approval and being political correct." Were you experiencing that throughout? And I gotta throw the reason why I'm asking you that question is the last 6 years I served in the mentorship program with UCLA football team. My best friend's Jim Mora. He's no longer there, but one of his great frustrations after being in the NFL for 25 years is that he just had such a hard time trying to get things through. He knew what it took to have excellence within a program, from personnel to systems to software, everything else that goes along with it. And just to get something done, it just seemed like it took him forever, and it was always a battle.
Yeah, I was there at a period when, the big marketing of programs now is nationwide. But back then, the idea of having a television screen showing action or marketing or advertisements at games almost didn't exist. And so I was trying to build a basketball program built on attracting people to come, because we had built an athletic facility at the university for the first time. And none of the alumni ever came back to the university because the basketball arena was off campus. So my frustration, I would come home at night and I would be frustrated because I would have this idea and my boss would say, "Gee, I don't think we should try something like that." Or I'd sit down in a committee meeting and people would be conscious about, let's make sure we don't make a mistake. Let's make sure we don't take a risk. And so I was coming home at nighttime and 2 or 3 times a week, and I would be frustrated by the bureaucracy. And I'm not sure I realized it because I was excited about the opportunity and the ideas I had, but my wife saw it in me that I was frustrated. And she thought this one opportunity in this magazine article would give me a chance to make decisions and fail or succeed on those decisions.
And okay, so now you've been married to Paula for 42 years now or more. Right.
Yes.
And so this is the person who is encouraging you to, press on. What 2 things? So was she, one, did you guys have any kids? And 2, was she working at the time?
She was working. I was making $30,000 a year. She was making about $18,000 a year. We had a 1-year-old baby. We had just bought our first house, which was $30,000 house.
Yeah.
Just starting out.
Where was this? What part of the country? Was it Washington, D.C.?
Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Yep.
The university I was at was at George Washington University. I had an 18% interest rate on the mortgage of my home. I still had some student debt that I had to get rid of. But for some reason, I'm often asked the question, well, why did you take that chance? But for some reason, it was just, even with a 1-year-old, and even with the debt, and even with the worry that you wouldn't succeed because this person said there was no competition, there was something inside of you which said, there was this grit inside of you which says that maybe you can succeed at doing this. It's a confidence that you have in yourself, that your ideas may work, but you're not afraid of failure at the same time.
Yeah, so, sometimes it can go in two ways, and it just depends on the pressures that are on you. So you can still have that confidence. I started some different companies post my football career, and I had a little, not a lot, but a little bit of money, as a reserve, so I could fall back, and I had a little runway to get things going. And when you're making not that much money with 18% interest rate on your house and a new baby, and your wife is making ends meet, you may have the confidence, but it's also something that you have to double think, and some people do it and some people don't.
And to tell you that the risk we took, my wife quit her job. She was one of our partners. So there were three of us who started the company. It was the person who sent me the original article, and my wife and I, we had no money for an office. So a friend of mine named Chuck Hagel, who later became the Secretary of Defense, rented us his stationery closet. And we used to work in his stationery closet. And to give you an idea what that was like, if we had to leave that stationery closet for any reason, even to use the bathroom, we often had to wait for one of Chuck's meetings to be over, because you had to walk from our closet through Chuck's office just to get out of the office.
Well, look you had this really amazing TED Talk that I watched last night, and I'm going to put those in the show notes so everybody else can see it as well. And something that you touched on in there, which I really feel applies, is very applicable in this situation, and it was applicable in my situation, is when this whole notion about the fork in the road and what do you do, right? And we're all faced with different choices. And I've been working with this marketing branding guy recently, and a guy that we both know. It's really made me dig down and focus as I look back on some forks in the road that have been really defining moments for me. One was from high school into college. One was post NFL into what am I going to do now? And then this last one and more recent one is my divorce. And, when I was going through all that, and it's been tough, when I was dealing with that. But, you're kind of forced with, do you go through door A or door B? And for you, it would have been very easy and comfortable to sit as the athletic director of George Washington University. But look where you are now looking back on your life, again, speeding up those chapters from chapter 1, and now we're on chapter 20 or 50 or whatever chapter you're on right now. And if you hadn't taken that risk, you wouldn't have all these amazing experiences.
Right. And what I'm trying to do, it's easy for me at my age to look back and see the turning points. As you get older, it's easy to look back and say, well, this changed my life, and this changed my life, and I made this good decision, or I made this bad decision. What I'm trying to do with these stories in the book is to have younger people look at those turning points as they get to those turning points, before they get to that situation where they're going to look back and regret not recognizing them. Yogi Berra once said, when I get to a fork in the road, which is a turning point, I take it. And unfortunately, that's what most of us do. We don't really pay attention to those turning points, those forks in the road. When we get to them, we just kind of just drive right past them. And what I'm trying to do is for us to look at the opportunities we're given in life and to make wise and good decisions to go in one direction or another direction.
So that's the book you're talking about, all about turning points. So for you, when you start talking about that, do you have a strategy where you're essentially taking the time out and being able to be very reflective, understanding that you're at that door, you're at that turning point?
Right. I think it's important for all of us to sit down for some period of time every single day and think about what just happened during the day, and what did I just experience, and was there a turning point? Because turning points aren't always those big, huge turning points, but one big turning point can be a series of small little turning points. And when we make a good decision or a bad decision, it's good for us to look back on it at the time it takes place and realize, did I make a good decision? And I'm very cautious. I'm not afraid to make decisions, but I think through those decisions, seeing which door is a better door to go through before I make the decisions.
Yeah, go ahead.
I make quick decisions. So I don't want people to believe that I want everybody to hesitate to making a decision, but you have to look at the decision you're making.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I'm listening to that, another thing that I wrote down through this exercise I've been doing of what were the turning points, and the kind of the whole idea that really came to me was really I was at the point of no return. So I did kind of the same thing that you were talking about, is being very cautious about the way that these things were about to play out. And I finally got to a point in the decision-making process that if I didn't go this way, that something bad was going to happen. If I didn't go this way, something good potentially was going to happen. And so I had to take that decision.
Right. And I think you can make a series of bad decisions and then correct yourself. You can then find another path to take. But why end up doing that in the first place? I mean, if you can make your path wiser and better when you're making it, why not pay attention to the decisions, the big and little decisions that you're making at the time that you're making them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, we're all trying to limit the amount of mistakes that we make in life and minimize those and make make all the right decisions. And at the same time, you take some risk involved. So let's go back and talk about that fork in the road. So now you're married, you have a newborn baby, and your wife, really encourages you to press on. And now your office is this essentially little box. It sounds like it's like 100 square feet, and you're in there with your wife, yourself, and one other guy, and you're banging the phones, and you're starting a new business that you knew nothing about. What are you thinking?
Well, back then there was no internet, so there was no email, and so what we would do is we would sit in our closet and we would think of famous people, and we'd write out a letter to the famous person, and we would send it off, and we would get letters back from lawyers who saying, don't contact this person again because they're already represented by another agency. The problem with us when we were starting, it was that there was no internet. There was no way for us to know what kind of an industry we were getting into and whether Harry Walker's claim, that agency's claim of no competitors, was true.
This podcast is brought to you by Laird Superfoods. Let me tell you, these creamers are so amazing. They're super tasty, super delicious, and what they are is whole, natural food ingredients mixed into these creamers. And I'm telling you, when you put this stuff into your drink, this powder substance, it is amazing. And their whole tagline is all about fueling your journey. You cannot go and actually power your way up a mountain, be in the pool, ride a big wave, unless you're properly fueled. And these guys are doing it all the right way. So where can you find this? At lairdsuperfood.com. And here's the kicker. If you use the code name MarkP20, that's Mark P20, you're going to get 20% off on your first order. So check it out, lairdsuperfood.com.
What kind of an industry we were getting into and whether Harry Walker's claim, that agency's claim of no competitors, was true. What we found out was there were actually 5 or 6 large agencies in addition to this one big agency, but this agency considered themselves the best. And they didn't consider anybody else to be competitors to them. So we spent a year in that closet, and near the end of a year, we were about out of money, and we didn't represent anyone. And so we were about 2 months away from closing when I got a call from a guy named Steve Bell, who was the anchorman for Good Morning America. I had helped Steve use the swimming pool when I had been at the university, and Steve had been under one of those written contracts with another agency, and they hadn't produced for him. So he had somehow found out that we were starting a new agency, called me up and said, would you like to come over and sit down and talk about it? So I went over to his office. We sat down and talked. I asked Steve if we could represent him. He agreed. I shook his hand, and I drove back to the office. On the way back to the office, I suddenly realized that I had not signed him to that traditional written contract. When I got back to the closet, I explained to my wife why we hadn't said it. I tried to say, well, what good would it do to sign to a piece of paper if he's going to be unhappy? We'll just let him go. But that decision turned out to be another turning point for us, because Steve went then and told other friends, other journalists in Washington, D.C., that if you don't want to sign a written contract and be held by a year or 2 years and then be worried whether they're going to produce for you, you can go with these new guys in town, shake their hand, and walk out on them anytime you want. And suddenly we got 4 or 5 Washington journalists who all on a handshake signed with us. Over a period of 25 years, We've never signed a written contract, including those 3 presidents we've represented, 5 prime ministers, countless world leaders, journalists, sports people. No one has ever signed a written contract with us. It's all been on a handshake.
So how do you do that then? Tell me the connection point, how you guys, so there's you guys sit in the middle and there are events. And then on the other side, you've got this stable of superstars that have these speeches that are ready to go. Some famous, some not, but they're interesting in their own way. So how do you find out about the events? How does that whole process work?
Well, at the beginning, it was more, trying to get in to meet. These events are taking place within corporations or trade associations or universities, and sometimes they're public forums. So there's a whole variety of different events that take place, some of them big and some of them small. And what you do as an agency is you represent your roster of speakers. And what that means is that you find them speaking engagements. They will tell you, I'd like to do 12 speaking engagements this year. I would like to do them within this certain period of time. And you decide on the fee that you're going to be charging for them. And then you go out, you have a series of agents who work for your company, and you go out and try to find speaking engagements for them and to fulfill their obligation. And in order to keep them, you need to fulfill the obligation that you have made to them. Despite the fact that it's a handshake, you still have to live up to your word.
Incredible. So this took you essentially, what I read, 8 years to go from zero to somewhat significant in the marketplace.
We would pick up people like Lou Holtz, who was the football coach at Notre Dame. We would pick up Terry Bradshaw, George Will. We picked up a lot. Basically, we picked up a lot of columnists because we were in Washington, D.C. In 1988, this was our big turning point. We got an invitation to go to the White House to interview with 20 other agencies, including Hollywood agencies, to represent Ronald Reagan. Now, nobody in Washington really thought we would represent Ronald Reagan. I mean, we were still a rather small agency, and there was only about 7 or 8 of us working in the company at the time. But it was going to be a good experience with us. So we sat down and we had one interview, and we weren't happy with it, but we got invited back to another interview. There were a series of 3 interviews, and nobody in Washington, D.C., it's a very gossipy town. So, usually you can find out what's going on, but nobody knew anything and who was going to be selected. And this lasted for 2 months. Finally, 2 months later, I get a call from Fred Ryan, who was the chief of staff for Ronald Reagan. So I picked up the phone and I braced myself for the bad news, expecting for him to say, you guys have done a really good job. You should be proud of what you've accomplished in 8 short years. But we've decided to go with a bigger, more established agency. So I picked up the phone and he says, Bernie Swain, Ronald Reagan and Mrs. Reagan have selected you to represent them. And I didn't quite know what to say to him, so I promised I would do a good job, and I quickly hung up the phone. I sat there for about an hour or 2 hours expecting for them to call back again saying, we made a huge mistake. We called the wrong telephone number.
Yeah.
and as you know, as an athlete, athletes are often very superstitious. And I was, for years, I was so superstitious, I was afraid to ask, how it all happened. How did Ronald Reagan select a small agency like us when he was interviewing all the big agencies, including the Hollywood agencies, because he had been at Hollywood before? So Fred Ryan came to our office one day, and I said, Fred, I've got to ask you, it's been a couple of years now, and I feel, we've done a good job. How did this all happen? And he said, well, actually, you came in second. Ronald Reagan picked Harry Walker, which was the original big agency. So I almost, couldn't breathe, thinking, gee, it was a mistake, and this is going to be embarrassing. And he says, but Ronald Reagan picked you because he believed in entrepreneurism and the little guy. And he saw what you, your partner, and your wife, Paula, were doing, and he wanted to support entrepreneurism and helping somebody start out a company on their own. Which shows you, what kind of a person, Ronald Reagan was, to make a decision to risk his legacy on three people who were totally inexperienced.
Well, again, let's go back to that fork in the road for you, right? So you have this opportunity to play it safe and stay at George Washington, and who knows what that would have led you to in terms of being an athletic director from, maybe you were there, maybe at Notre Dame, ultimately, maybe you're at some other big university, maybe you're in professional sports, but at the same time, you look back and ultimately, you got to be at the plate with the biggest talent, the biggest boys, on the block. And that really catapulted you, it sounds like, after that 8-year period of starting the company and taking that to somewhat relevance. And now all of a sudden it just launches you, amplifies you to a whole different level.
Yeah, it is a great feeling of accomplishment when you build something on your own. It gives you a sense of confidence in yourself, an idea that you can do something and you're not afraid to fail when you try to do it.
So let's go back to those first, again, you're in the small office, you call it a closet, and there's three of you stuffed in there, and you're having to do business the old-fashioned way in 1980, 81, 82, 83, and there's no internet, and so it's snail mail, it's picking up the rotary phone, all the way back. You guys aren't making it. I mean, there's self-doubt. I mean, there's so many people out there that your story is amazing, but at the same time, it's just, for so many, it's that little, devil and angel on either shoulder. And, one is saying you can't do it, and the other one is saying go for it.
Right. I think, so many people starting out today, just think with the way the taxi driver system is today, who would have invented Uber and thought it would succeed? Yeah. You look, who would have started a coffee shop and believed you could do it nationwide? You see the competition out there with other organizations, and you say to yourself, that industry is already full. There's nothing for us to accomplish. I can't. And the idea is that you have to look at it differently. To give you an idea, when we started out, even with 4 or 5 journalists, including Steve Bell, the other agencies represented 15, 30 different people. So, there was still no reason for a corporation or a trade association, the people who have these events, to listen to us. And we had to somehow get work for these 4 or 5 people. So the idea with building a company on your own is that you got to turn it upside down and look at it totally different. We sat in that closet, and we would say to ourselves, gee, nobody will answer our phone calls, even though we represent 4 or 5 fairly well-known people. And so we can't get anybody to book these speakers. And so we said to ourselves, okay, if we can't get in to see them, we're going to bring them to see us. So we came up with an idea that we went to a local hotel and we said, we're going to bring a lot of meeting planners to your local hotel. Would you give us a ballroom for free for one night? And they agreed. Then we said to Steve Bell, we said, Steve, we're going to invite a lot of meeting planners from corporations and trade associations to hear you speak. Would you speak for free for us? And then we sent out to everybody we could find that was a meeting planner, and we invited them to come to this one event for free and hear Steve Bell speak. We thought we would get, 80, 70, 80 people. We got over 600 people show up. And we got up there and we were able to let we introduced the speakers. All 3 of us introduced ourselves. I had my son there, and we brought him up on the stage. They got to see us as human beings, and they got to relate to us and see what we were like. And so by taking a situation which, even though we were making some success, looked like we were going to end up failing in the end, you turn it upside down and you look at something totally different. That was what I was trying to do at the university that I was frustrated with. I was coming up with ideas for marketing and doing things, and people never heard of that stuff for a university before. So, there was hesitation to do anything like that. But when I was doing it within the context of my own company, then you're willing to take that risk and to do it, and there's nobody there to say no to you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, one of the things you said too, which I think is a crossover, into just anybody when they get up and speak. At least when if it either spoke or I listen to other people speaking, and delivering their different message, is that relatability, right? And it sounds like if you can figure out a way to connect to the audience in a way, whether you're listening or you're delivering, that is where the magic, stirs. And for you, it really was the catalyst to really spark your whole organization and a lot of your success.
Relationships are the most important thing you can do. The reason those handshakes work is because I trusted the speaker, and the speaker trusted me on my word, not by a piece of paper. And the same thing when I dealt with corporations and trade associations and CFOs and CEOs of companies. It was the relationship that I had with them. They knew that when I said somebody was going to do something, or somebody was going to be somewhere, or they were going to give a speech on a certain topic, they know they could trust me. And whether you're running that small coffee shop or a big agency or some other entrepreneurial enterprise, the whole idea is trust. Can I trust that you're going to give me a good product? Can I trust that you're going to take care of me? Lou Holtz has 3 rules. Can I trust you? Are you committed to excellence? And do you care about me? And that is all business is. It's nothing else than those 3 questions.
Love that. Care, committed, and trust.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, no, it's just a amazing thing. We can really make that connection, and then that just like keeps going and going and going. And then when you actually deliver, you get the goods, and presto, people are impressed, and they want to keep hiring people from your organization. So tell me where Washington Speakers Bureau is today. I mean, obviously, you must be worldwide. You must have just a whole stable full of amazing people.
We do. We still George Bush, H.W. Bush just passed away, and we represented him. One of the nicest people I've ever met. We represented his son George. Ronald Reagan. I represented from Margaret Thatcher to Tony Blair to the last 5 prime ministers of Great Britain, the prime minister of Israel, presidents of Australia and Canada, and sports people and authors and journalists and all sorts of people. We are twice as large as the nearest competitor that we have now. And we're doing work in every country in the world, whether it's the Middle East or Asia or Europe or everywhere. We're still located in one location in Alexandria, Virginia. We still have an office building there, but we deal worldwide with the people we represent and the companies that book them. We do a lot of events. I mean, we must do 12 to 14 events in Korea, every single year. So that just gives you an idea of the extent of the locations that we do work with.
You mentioned Reagan and Bush and Schwarzkopf and Terry Bradshaw and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's a who's who. And I know all these people are wonderful and fantastic, and they're amazing speakers. And I want to leave the speaking part of it aside for a second, in terms of, because some people just have a better gift than others in terms of delivering when they're on stage. But in terms of you sitting in an office with another person, is there a person or 2 of these amazing people that come to mind that it was just like you had just a special connection with, were amazing in every single way, and was, you could see why they had their own success?
Right. Well, of course, Alex Haley gave me the idea for the book, and his whole idea of roots was based on relationships and what is inside of us. But I think the person who influenced me the most was Lou Holtz, who was the football coach at Notre Dame.
Yep.
I remember sitting in my office when we were 4 or 5 years old, and I was thinking, when you have a little bit of success when you haven't had it before, there's a temptation to kind of start cutting corners. And I have to admit that at one point in my life, I got to a point where I was willing to kind of cut corners to do whatever maybe those handshakes weren't as important anymore. Maybe I could just make more money, charge a higher fee, whatever it took. Could I make it happen faster by just doing it anyway? And Lou Holtz had sent me a letter, and in the letter was those 3 different questions. Can I trust you? Are you committed to excellence? And you care about me? And I kind of read the letter, looked at it, put it back on top of my desk, and I left it there for a couple of days. And I'm going through this period when I think I'm going to start cutting corners and probably would have given the entire culture of the company away that was trying to build something I was building to try to, build something of my own that I would be proud of. I was risking giving it away. And I suddenly looked after 3 or 4 days of that letter sitting on my desk, and then I read it again, and I suddenly realized, can I trust you? Are you committed to excellence? Do you care about me? And I suddenly realized there are no shortcuts in life. I mean, you do things the right way, and you do things for the right reasons, and you care about people, and you commit yourself to excellence, and you care about others. And if you try to do anything else, then you're just doing a disservice to yourself, your family, friends, and those you do work with.
Yeah, and let me tell you something. I believe that every single thing you just said, and it's really propelled me through my college career with my legendary coach, Don James, who was a Hall of Famer. It led me into the NFL and climbing these crazy mountains all over the world. Ed Viesters, who lives here in Sun Valley, he has a book called No Shortcuts to the Top. And whether you're talking about mountain climbing or business or football, nothing ever phenomenal and great ever happened by taking shortcuts. It's just those daily discipline of steps that you take, that one foot in front of the other to finally get you to where you want to be. And the next thing you look up and, great things have happened.
Yeah. And nothing lasts when you try to take shortcuts. You may have temporary success. You may think, you cut that corner and you're doing something and you're going to be real famous or real successful or real rich. All of a sudden you're going to find those shortcuts will come to an end, and it's like, I'd rather go slow and steady and make it last than I would do it quickly and then have it fall apart.
No, well said. There's this great story. I just want to throw this in there because it's a fun story to hear, and it's a fun story to tell. But Lou Holtz, when he was the head coach at Notre Dame University, one weekend he had told his assistant coaches to bring in all the top recruits. So, of course, you have several weekends that build up where you have these different guys coming in and out. But on this one particular weekend, he wanted to have the top guy from every position come in. And he gathered everybody in his office, and so there were, say, 20 recruits that were standing there. And he goes, guys, you understand this. If every single person signs, because you are the top guy throughout the country at your position that we want here at Notre Dame University, and if you guys all sign, we will win the national championship. So do what you got to do, but just understand that the power of connection, the power of trusting each other, all those things you just talked about. If you guys, and they did, and they won the national championship. So his power of influence and saying the right thing at the right time really convinced those young kids with a vision of, if you do this, this other thing can happen, came through.
Right. And if you do it right, then they'll come through.
Well, that's where the coaching comes in of really, in my case, I was so blessed to have Don James, and Don James had really taken this whole pyramid of success from John Wooden, right, the great UCLA coach. So, however, whatever map you need a roadmap to get where you're going. It's hard to go someplace if you don't know how to get there.
Yeah, you're right. And I hope people get a chance to look at the book. It's in paperback now, and it's a collection of stories of people who started from very modest beginnings like I did, and they recognize the turning points in their lives, and they're all from all different makeup of life, and people get a chance. I hope they'll get a chance to look at the book or share.
Absolutely. Where can people find that book?
It's on Amazon, and it's in paperback and hardcover now. And also they can go to my website, which is bernieswain.com. And if they have questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions for them. You can find me on Facebook or or LinkedIn. And if people are starting out today or they have a question about, maybe what they're doing and would they like some ideas, I'd be glad to answer those questions anytime.
No, that's just phenomenal. And I appreciate you doing that. I really do. I mean, you've got such a breadth of knowledge and wisdom that you can impart on a lot of people that are up and coming and just trying to figure it out, right? And going back to the kind of the beginning, what we're talking about, those forks in the road, those turning points of really taking that time out and going through the mental process of, should I take a left or should I take a right? And so when you have mentors around you, not only to internalize it, but also ask, that really helps.
Yeah, and I would, you got to remember, I started out I probably would have never gone to college if it hadn't been for a mentor in my high school, an athletic director, a football coach who kind of encouraged me to go in the direction. So that's one of the turning points, paying attention to the people that are in your life that can positively influence you.
Yeah, no, that's what it's all about. I call it paying it forward. And, so if you've gotten to that spot where you can turn around and help people along, that, it just means so much to everybody. And hopefully they can do that in return, once they've gone through the cycle of life a little bit.
Right, exactly.
So listen, Bernie, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
No, listen, you're a rock star. I thoroughly, whenever I do my podcast, I have to spend, quite a bit of time of just doing the research. And I just thoroughly, enjoyed sitting back and just really getting to know your story a lot better. I hope people really take in what you've been able to share today. And for sure, go out and buy. Really, it's a book of inspiration. All about turning points. Your book that you've written.
Yeah, and even if you're older, and it's a great book for people starting out in life today.
That's awesome. I'm gonna sounds like a great Christmas present for my daughters. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much,
Mark. Thank you very much.
Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. Okay, if you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. So, until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.